So I'm Elizabeth Smith, Betsy actually, as my friends call me, with PLC Associates, a Scholarus learning company. And let me just tell you a little bit about Scholarus and PLC. We're a group of experienced educators who work side by side with you to elevate teaching and learning and leadership practices. And I can tell you, as a retired teacher and superintendent, having a plan in place is essential in order to move ahead. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Get the data advantage, how we're going to collect the evidence we need to anchor ourselves. Now, I'm also here with my colleague, Betsy Connors. And Betsy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Great to have you with us. And you're joining the Betsy and Betsy show. And I, as well, have been with PLC Associates for multiple years. And before that, I was an assistant superintendent for instruction. So I truly understand this work that we're doing around planning, because I spent many years writing strategic plans, writing school improvement plans, and just helping leaders to set their goals.
So you may have joined us for our first and second sessions. And our first session with Carolyn Tinsley Tremmel was teaching and at the center of learning. And we talked about the practices that need to be in place in order to have a long-range school plan. And then our second session with my colleague, Betsy Connors, we discussed the nuts and bolts of plans that impact culture and student performance. We went through some diagnostics and fidelity of implementation. Today, we'll talk about data as a foundation for our plan. On a personal note, the word data makes me cringe. I hate looking at spreadsheets of numbers, but I also love talking about students and staff, and the conversations that we have about students are the ones that ignite us, ignite our passion, and get us started for what we need to do to help our students. Please use the chat box if you'd like to ask a question, talk with one another. We'll be asking you some questions, and we certainly would like this time with you to be interactive. So I see we have a couple of people already starting, and that's great. So one of the most important things we can do is analyze where we are currently, taking a look at what our culture is like, what our students are doing, what our leadership organization looks like, and then with our team also talking about what is our desired state. And this is where we need to be bold and imaginative. Let's be creative, knowing that whatever it is that we desire, we can have it. And we're here to work with you side by side to make that reality happen. But we're not going to be able to do that unless we understand exactly where we are so we can move forward. And with our improvement plans, we can generate a lot of excitement. Sometimes that's difficult to do in schools. You know, we certainly don't want to bring in initiatives and have people say, oh, here's one more thing. This is the next latest and greatest. It's not that. It's about carefully deciding where we want to go, and then remembering to keep our plans alive, bringing it forward to people so we can see our progress. Everyone, our custodians, the people serving our lunch, our bus drivers, especially our students, need to know we've been listening and we are putting things in place and we are making progress. It helps us feel really good about the commitments that we're making.
And Betsy, I love that piece about excitement and ignite, because really this is our chance to celebrate. Also, data allows us to celebrate those great things that we're doing.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes it fun. So when you're thinking of those 5 critical areas for precise data, read through the 5 that are right here and think for a moment, how do I currently gather the data around leadership structures and practices that really share with people what we're tight about and what we stand for? And that curriculum around that area, what is it we want our students to know and be able to do? That teaching and learning, what's occurring in those classrooms each and every day? The student supports, how do we help them and assist them? And then one that is near and dear to my heart is really that family connection, because we are in the customer service business. So how do we gather that data from our consumers, our parents and our students to find out how are we truly doing?
Good point. I'd just like to mention with leadership practices and structures, I bet at one point in our careers, we've all worked with a leader who doesn't quite get it. And we know how that feels. We need to look very closely at our practices at all of these levels so that we can work together and make sure that we are collaboratively solving the problems we need to. Betsy, would you like to talk about this slide?
I would, because I love this slide. And here's why. Last week, I talked a little bit about this as well. Where do we fall? What quadrant do you as a district fall? Just take a minute, or you in your school. Because what we want to help you do this morning is to see that it is possible. Use your data to become a leading learning organization. Think about that. To get you to those quadrants of leading and learning. And we do that, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, through assessing, gathering that data, analyzing, and then taking action. And that's what Betsy and I do so much of as we travel around and work with districts on strategic plans. We help you get to that point of moving your district forward because you are then focusing on the right drivers. And just like that slide where we just showed you those 5 areas for collecting data, when you do that with fidelity, that's when you move to that leading learning organization.
Oops.
So now we are going to move into our concentric circles and why it works. So just think for a minute. Look at this bullseye that we have in front of you. The most important piece is always to have your students at the center. Those common formative assessments. Pause for a minute and think about, do your teachers use on a regular and consistent basis those common formative assessments to drive individual student progress? And then move out to the red, to the teacher practices, that curriculum. And we have something that we're going to talk about a little bit more, that's the personal learning reflection tool that allows your teachers to reflect and set goals for themselves. Because there's nothing our teachers hate more than when we do professional learning that's one size fits all, right? That doesn't build that movement and start that movement and build that momentum that we need. So this is a tool that helps with that. Betsy and I do a lot around leadership practices with our leverage leadership inventory that we'll talk about. We talk about infrastructure and the organizational assessment, which later I'll take a dive into because I've done this with so many districts and it's exciting work. And then we'll talk about the culture and our data triangle and really dive into that piece as well. Because when you put all of these 5 pieces together, reflecting on those 5 areas I talked about 2 slides ago, folks, you will be in the learning leading area. But what we have to do is tie this up with a pretty bow for the people that we're serving and letting them see the connections. Because if you do any of these things in isolation, you'll frustrate the team. We have to connect it all together. And as our friend Michael Fulham would say, we need to develop that coherence around these areas. Betsy, anything you want to add?
No, but I think that you're absolutely right. As we are wrapping this around one another, this is why it works so well, because we're hitting all of the important points on the target. And if we misfire in one particular place, we just don't move quickly and as high as we want to go.
And then we use my favorite thing where we move slow to move fast.
Yes, that is so true.
So take a moment and read through this slide, if you would, please. And I'm actually traveling to a district tomorrow where we're going to engage in this continuous improvement work. And I'm so excited about it because we wrote the strategic plan to match what the district needs were based on data sets. And now we're looking at those data sets and saying, how do we go have that ongoing longitudinal analysis and actions? Because school improvement, and I talked a little bit about this in the last session, it's not one and done. It's an ongoing process that allows us to continue to grow and move from, as Jim Collins would say, from good to great, because we all aspire to be great. And as Betsy, you just talked about, sometimes it doesn't go exactly the way we planned, or we don't hit that bullseye. But resist pressing that default button because that does stress people out. But instead, think about how can we get ourselves back on track and moving forward to, again, keeping our students at that bullseye at the center to serve them.
So true. You know, as we look at our current state, it's so important for each of you and all of us in education to think about what types of data we are collecting and how much of it is really in place as far as, yes, we may collect the data, but are we using it? Are we making time within our schedules for people to look at the data points that are most necessary for them and most user-friendly for them? We all know we can get a lot of data, but I find that in my work with schools, time is difficult. When do we give ourselves enough time for all of this? So think about your teams and what evidence are people bringing forward for discussion. You can use the chat box if you'd like to add something in there. Think about student work. Are we bringing student work to our teams, our department meetings? Is there an expectation during our meetings that after looking at student work and various performance data, common assessments, for example, is there an expectation that we're going to go out and try some strategies, come back and report on them? That feedback loop of having discussions with our colleagues about what works and what doesn't, trying things in our classrooms, coming back and continuing to refine what we do in a real collegial way. So this is how we're really moving towards continuous improvement. How would you describe the data culture in your school?
You know, and Betsy, you bring up a good point, because in some districts, as soon as you say data, you said some people perceive that as a bad word, right? They're like, oh, no, I'm not going to talk about data. But again, you just hit on something very important. We're changing the culture. We're changing the beliefs and the behaviors around data and how we use it, so that we use it again to celebrate, not as a gotcha, but to celebrate and look for those areas that might be those challenges and those road bumps to getting to our desired state.
Great. So we're looking at the concentric circles here again. Now, common formative assessments are unique to every school. And so we're going to start with looking at teacher practices, the curricula and pedagogy. And I'd like to talk to you about the professional learning reflection tool, which is a series of benchmarks. And in fact, we have 10 categories within this survey. And these benchmarks are all tied to research and best practices. So we have categories around student achievement, engagement, of course, which drives achievement. we have a category on student ownership of learning. Higher order complex questioning. Here before you on this slide, we see a few questions from checking for understanding. So we have another category, differentiated instruction. Now, with our benchmarks, we also have an opportunity for teachers to anonymously check how they feel they're doing on any of these benchmarks. So M stands for mastery at the top here. Mastery, we have what the P is, proficiency, of course. Effectiveness, being effective in an area. And A stands for awareness. So that means you're aware of this practice, but not really feeling comfortable actually working with it. So what's the point of all this? When we have an opportunity to anonymously reflect on our practice, we can take all of the answers for a group of teachers and we put them together so that we can see across the board, across the school, how people are doing. So we've taken those who have felt that they have mastered or are proficient in any of these benchmarks and put them together and color-coded it. And you can see here in this area of checking for understanding, we're giving some percentages of how people feel they're doing. So one that is coming up in the red shows us that only 37.3% of the teaching staff in this group felt that they understand or use the SUSA idea of 10 minutes of teaching time or talking time, followed up with 2 minutes of mental processing time, sort of a turn and talk or turn and draw discussion. We know from brain research that students and even adults need time to process information. So that's something that we might highlight for professional learning opportunities. With a tool like this, we can see where our strengths and weak areas are in regards to teaching practices across the school. Individual teachers can see where they are falling and can then personalize professional learning opportunities for themselves. Maybe their colleagues are doing great with a particular thing, and you're thinking, I'm not so good at that. I'd like to learn more about it. So you have opportunities to reach out for the areas that you are interested in improving. And let me just show you something that comes from another school we've been working with. In this chart, we're seeing that across the board, this school chose student learning targets, complex questioning, differentiated instruction, checking for understanding, and targeted feedback as areas for improvement. So in informal walkthroughs, these may be teacher-led walkthroughs or principals and APs and directors informally going in and out of classrooms, they were looking for these strategies. And in September, we see a certain amount of practice going on. And 2 months later, in November, you see that each of these practices has improved. When we focus on a practice and we share with our colleagues, we are elevating ourselves, sharing our best practices. When it's visible to everyone and we're all working at it with professional learning, we are certainly going to improve. And we see that in looking at gathering walkthrough data every 2 months, in this particular school, we've seen tremendous improvements by May.
And Betsy, adding to that, one of the exciting opportunities, because again, I believe challenges are opportunities in work clothes, you're allowed then to, between that 9:30 and that 11:30 timeframe, to do professional learning, either again through your faculty meetings or to offer a book study. So there's so many opportunities to allow teachers to go in and do those teacher-led learning walks in between so they can observe each other. It just opens up a whole opportunity for professional learning for your staff.
Yeah, and when we think about our school plans, if we have collaboratively developed these plans, and if we have taken our current data and talked about where do we want to be, then everyone has bought into these strategies already. So it's not a top-down situation. This is truly collection of people who identified certain things. And that's the key to a successful plan. All right, back to these concentric circles. Where should we go next, Betsy Connors?
I think we're heading towards the leadership practices.
All right, so let's go there. Leverage Leadership is a signature program here at PLC Associates. It's a similar benchmarked survey in that all of the benchmarks reflect best leadership practices. And a set of leaders in school and across the district, principals, assistant principals, directors, reflect on their practice. And in this particular slide, we see off to the right that we have some pre 2020-21 work where highly effective HE and effective practices. So we see that in the beginning of this work with this school, leaders were not feeling confident about any of these particular practices we see on this screen. After working with them for a year, you can see the growth in our post survey taken in the spring, where each of these practices have shown some growth. And with discussion around this, we're building the leadership capacity of all of our leaders. Take a look at number 18 here. Ability to think critically and problem solve with teachers in a way that changes practice. We had a lot of discussions around what changes practice. How do we support teachers? Putting a lens on how our students are doing, being in classrooms, understanding the complexities of that minute-to-minute moment in the classroom with our students is very, very important.
And Betsy, as you're talking about that collective leadership efficacy for the people on this call, as you're thinking about your summer leadership trainings or your administrative retreats, think about how you could use some of these areas then to drive the work that you do with your leaders, because they need professional learning as well. That's why we do the whole leverage leadership component at PLC. And so be thinking of that and how we can help you.
So true. You know, I'd like to mention a case study that we have going. This data on the screen in front of you does not reflect this particular school, but I have been working with Patchogue Medford, and they have a large district with 31 administrators. So in working with the 31 administrators, they started out taking this anonymous survey, and over a couple of years, they were able to improve their capacity with their communication with one another. They were able to focus on the same initiatives between principals and directors, working with teachers and having targeted feedback, and those kinds of conversations that go on through looking at walkthrough data. So they were able to come off the New York State accountability list and now find themselves as a school in good standing, a district in good standing. And so we just have lots of examples of schools that have really benefited from these opportunities to reflect on leadership practices.
And there's that opportunity then for celebration.
Yeah.
Here's one of my favorites, which is the PLC Organizational Audit. This really allowed you to take a look at the 3,000-foot level of how your organization operates. And it's one that when you talk about all areas, you're talking about that safe climate for learning, you're talking about that accountable culture, you're looking at the data systems with the data dashboard, and you really take a look at what will help move us along. And many times, again, back to that retreat idea, for leaders on there, here's a little hint for you. If you're leading your retreat this summer, start with high expectations for all and work with your team to define that and then make it tangible. What does that look like? What does that sound like? Does that connect to our mission and our vision? That right there, that one area can be an entire retreat, because we have to, what did Betsy have up there a minute ago? Build leadership efficacy. That's what the organizational audit allows us to do. And many times when we do this in a district, depending on your level of leadership, you're going to rate it differently. But yet when you're at the soccer field or at the grocery store and people are approaching you, they're looking for that efficacy in the messaging. And this really allows you to get tight on what do we believe in our district. And to me, this is such fun work, because this is why the organization exists. So let's have that conversation about where we are, again, using that rubric, and where we want to be, our current state to our desired state. If our desired state is to get to green and 4s all the way along, then let's talk about the action steps we need to take to get there.
Let me just share with you a humorous story in working with the district around the organizational audit. Sometimes, since each individual administrator does this on their own, and then we compile everyone's perceptions, the superintendent thought or rated it as having a strategic plan, level 4, everything was great on a 5-year strategic plan. It turned out that several of the principals and directors had no idea a strategic plan was in place. So it was something that was on a shelf, had some good work done at the beginning, but 4 years later, it was sitting there, and it was a great wake-up call for the organization to realize, hey, we're not all on the same page. So if you want, that's number one. I think we've got to get on the same page as a group of leaders. And everything you said is so true, Betsy. So
guess where we're going again? We're back to our circles. So again, think about where we've been. We've been through our LRT, we've been through LLI, we've been through the OA, and now we're going to talk about that culture and the data triangle.
And this, to me, is one of the most powerful metrics we can pull together.
Absolutely. And as Betsy said, when I retired from my district, we had put these surveys into place for multiple years. So we had a longitudinal look at what our students thought, what our community thought, and our families, and what our staff thought. And when you take these 3 areas and you ask your students for feedback, you ask your families, and you ask your staff, and you compare, boy, perception becomes reality. And the conversation is so powerful. Because if your teachers think it's great and your families think it's great and your students are saying, then is it really great? And Betsy and I do a lot of work with what we call data cafes around the area, around the state, around the country, once you've given your surveys. And we come in and work with your administrators, work with your Board of Education. I have a board meeting coming up in a few weeks where we're actually going to go through and unpack, what did our students think? What did the staff think? And what did our families think? And talk about, were we surprised? Is it in alignment with what we thought? And what do we need to do then? What are the action steps we need to write? What are the goals to get to that desired state that we need to address? What do we need to address today? What do we need to address in 8 days and 8 weeks and 8 months? That becomes reality.
So here's an excerpt of student voice. Go ahead, Betsy.
We both get so excited about this because this is the crux of our work. Like, we are firm believers in giving students voice. So look at number 21. Classes are interesting and keep my attention. That is a red level for this district. Only 35% of the 0.6% of the students agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So what we have to do then is delve into that and say, why are they saying that? Is it our offerings? Are our offerings for the 1950s, or are our offerings forward thinking into the future? Are they innovative? My teachers ask questions that make me think. 62.7%. So let's have a discussion. Are we comfortable with that? Or do we want that to be better because we need to teach? Because in our mission statement, it says that we are going to develop critical think consumers of information. If that's in our mission statement, then we need to come back and say, we might want to work on that one a little more. What are questions? And do our teachers know how to ask questions that make students think? Because we don't want to stand and deliver, or do we need to support them with that?
Yes, great discussions that come out of these.
Love it. And then again, here's that school performance scan. So this is looking at, what do our teachers think? Our school leaders, number 5, build a collaborative environment so that staff work together in achieving goals. Woohoo! Celebrate that one. That's a lot of work right there, my friends.
Sorry.
That's okay. But then again, look at that top one. We use a school-based plan with specific SMART goals to guide our work. Because if everything is important, then nothing is important. So we have to help our teachers focus on those right drivers in order to make growth. So again, examples of celebration, examples of things that we need to hone in on. And we have a school-wide data system. The last one on this page. That is something that we can help you develop, because it's not hard, but it's determining what is the right data and in what mode do our teachers want to be consumers of that data. And again, you're never walking alone. We are thought partners for you in the field. You are welcome to reach out to PLC just to ask some further questions and to say, I'm intrigued by this. Can you just help me think differently? Or can you help provide me some additional information? That's the power.
Nothing excites us more than talking about real problems in education and real solutions.
Correctly, because they're there. And then Betsy's going to talk to you now about how you can crosswalk your data.
Right. So we can put our staff thoughts, our student thoughts, and our family thoughts around similar benchmarks and cross-reference these. And we have some amazing discrepancies sometimes that occur where students have their perspective and it's maybe very different from what teachers are saying. Just for example, right here, number 1, our school has a safe and welcoming environment. In this school, the 63% of the staff felt we do. But students only felt 48% and families about 49%. So we ask ourselves the question, why are we looking at this differently? And more importantly, what can we do so that students and families feel that it is welcoming and safe? So it generates a lot of conversation. When we look at our different perspectives, we see things from different angles, and it's very natural. So finding our baseline, we establish some targets, we take action from these surveys, and we communicate what we're doing. We let everyone know these are the results. This is what everyone is saying. This is what we're doing about it. That's so important in any improvement plan that you put together. Let people know it's alive and well.
And I look at number 7 that's up there, Betsy, and we have created structures so that students reflect on their learning and keep track of their progress. Just a food for thought. How do your students collect their data? Even starting in kindergarten. I'm a former kindergarten teacher, and then we used to set goals with the students. They knew what their goal was. And then think about this. What if you started student-led conferences where the students once a year present those goals to their families and present their progress? Just some little thoughts. pieces.
Those are big thought pieces. So let me share with you how one school district took their data triangle information and decided to use these benchmarks to measure progress toward their SMART goals. SMART goals we refer to specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So this is Tupper Lake School District in New York State, and their goal is here, a SMART goal up at the top, focusing on student engagement and ownership of learning. So they decided that they would measure this by looking at student survey responses from this data triangle. And they were looking for the aspirational benchmark of 75% of students agree or strongly agree to these benchmarks. And they chose 4 benchmarks, and you can see them here, and you can see that they had their baseline data. So we're looking at some growth. Take the first one here, C14 was the benchmark. We received specific feedback from our teachers on test assessments we take. In 2021, 60.7% agreed with that. They're looking for a 75% agreement, hoping for more. So each one of these benchmarks gets at one part of student engagement or ownership of learning. Now, they didn't want to just leave it as what did the students think, because it's important to have a well-rounded view. Looking at teachers on this next slide, we take the same goal and measure it through the data triangle survey benchmarks from the teacher's perspective. In this case, the team decided that they would like to see 85% of the staff agree or strongly agree to these 2 benchmarks. Students have strategies to track their own learning was initially at 44.3%. They would like to move that up to 85%. That means there'll be a very specific focus on this, talking about it with teams, colleague to colleague, helping people figure out ways that students can track their understandings on teacher developed rubrics, for example, is one of their big initiatives. So,
and many times our districts will come back to this and put these statements like students have strategies to track their own learning. They'll go after just that one and put it out as a quick survey, maybe in mid-year, January, to say, how are we doing? Are we making that progress?
Yeah. And with this case too, school leaders sharing information on school-wide walkthroughs. I want to make that clear that these are informal walkthroughs, 10 to 15 minutes in a classroom. It's not to evaluate teachers, it's to look at how students are doing and be able to give feedback. So important practices to think about. We have
so when you get to that social, emotional, developmental health, or that diversity, equity, inclusivity assessment, you, the district, get to choose from 100 benchmarks in 10 areas. And you can see what those areas are as you read through and be thinking about currently in your district, how do I look at those? And then again, you pick which ones you want to use. So in one district we were looking with, they really wanted to look at students treat each other with respect, because when they went in and looked at their behavior referrals, respect was an area that had risen to the top. My teachers tell me they believe I will succeed. Was that the mindset? Or were students just being compliant in school and kind of just sitting there as consumers of information, but not really being allowed to think and not really being told on a regular basis, you, Betsy, are the most important person here today, and I believe in you when no one else does, not even yourself.
And we know,
and then go ahead.
Relationships are extremely important here.
Absolutely. And so just to really go in and see that, because again, we're talking culture. And then that diversity piece, again, reading through some of the areas, you get to choose which ones you want to use. Students feel they feel included and part of the group or the school. In clubs and school activities, students of different backgrounds work well together. All students are treated the same regardless of family background and ethnicity. And that what about clubs and school activities? One of the districts I worked with in the North Country, when we talked with the students about the clubs and school activities, they felt they reflected what the teachers were interested in, not the students. So as part of our plan, we turned that upside down and we started some clubs that really were meaningful to them and addressed all areas. It was the most interesting case study to be a part of.
Mhm. And I think it's important to mention that in this set of survey benchmarks, you're able to choose the ones you want to ask. We never hand it off to you in full. You have an opportunity to look through the 10 categories and select some questions that you believe are most important for your culture. And we also engage you in thinking about other ways we can get at some of the most important things and understanding the culture. So we end up with quantitative measurements of culture. So I'd like you to think about your own school and what is your level? Where do you see your district in the area of collecting evidence, using that evidence to develop plans that are focused? So we have level 1 through level 5 here. Please know that Betsy Connors and I and our associates at PLC will assist you and work side by side with you to take a good look at your student performance, your teaching practices, your leadership practices, to decide where are you currently, where do you want to go with all of this? Have you captured the data that you need to make the most important decisions? Have you been able to identify your current state? And what are the data points that are going to help you move forward? This work comes from Victoria Bernhardt, and she has written a lot of books, published a lot of books. What we do at PLC Associates is try to spend a lot of time in the research world, figuring out what's going on, what are people finding, how do we translate that so that it can be practical for your school. And I want you to think very carefully about those concentric circles. And those areas are the ones we want to hit to know. We need to know what's going on in our schools so that we can elevate everyone. I often think when the tide comes in, all ships rise. It doesn't matter if you're in a kayak or a barge, a huge tanker, everyone benefits. And we're here to make sure that tide keeps rising. So you can contact us. The director of PLC is Penny Ciaburri, and her email is right here on the screen for you, and a phone number to call, as well as a QR code that you can scan right now. And we would be just happy to talk with you. As Betsy Connors said, just a phone call to ask some questions, get a thought partner. We love to discuss education.
Thank you so much for taking the first step and spending time with us this morning, because that's the first step, is continuing your learning, your professional learning, and seeking out that thought partner who can help you. We've done this work in our own districts, as well as go out and provide opportunities, wonderful opportunities to work with districts across the country. And we want to help you because you deserve that. You deserve someone to work side by side with you and be your thought partner. And because the other thing is, we also know sometimes it's hard to be the expert in your own land. But when you bring someone in that you can work side by side with, it actually works.
That's true. So true. So thank you for joining us. We hope that you have an absolutely wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully we'll meet again in some capacity. So long.